welcome to 5 Minute School, and in today's video we'll be discussing the regulation of the cardiac cycle. So here we have a diagram of the heart, and in terms of the composition of the heart we have myocardial cells, and these myocardial cells can contract automatically, so without any form of input from nerves and hormones or chemical mediators, for example. If these myocardial cells are alive, they will contract automatically. And the reason this happens is because of something which is known as spontaneous diastolic depolarization of the pacemaker cells in the sinoatrial node. And if you didn't know, the heart possesses two nodes, which are the sinoatrial node, which is here, and the atrioventricular node, which is here. And the pacemaker cells of the sinoatrial node have membrane channels which are called HCN channels, and HCN stands for hyperpolarization activated cyclic nucleotide gated channel. So these HCN channels are in the membranes of the pacemaker cells, and these channels respond to hyperpolarization, which happens at the end of the previous action potential. So at the end of the action potential there's hyperpolarization, so these channels, these HCN channels, respond to that. So what they do is they open up at the end of the previous action potential, and there's Na plus influx, which means Na plus diffuses in, and what this does is this produces the depolarization stimulus for the following action potential. And if you don't understand the mechanisms of hyperpolarization and depolarization, I've made a previous video, so check on my channel and check a few previous videos. There's some on hyperpolarization and depolarization. Okay, so that's how the myocardial cells will contract. They will it's mainly due to the pacemaker cells having these HCN channels, which allows the Na plus to go inside the cell following hyperpolarization, and this produces this depolarization stimulus, which eventually will initiate the contraction later in the line. So there's also some further chemical mediators or neurotransmitters which are involved, and for example, one of them is epinephrine, which is produced in the adrenal medulla, and we have norepinephrine, which is produced from the released from the sympathetic axons. And what they do is they open up these HCN channels also of the pacemaker cells, and this causes a faster rate of this diastolic depolarization, and this in turn will cause more action potentials to be produced, and more rapidly as well. And then the overall effect is the increase in cardiac rate, so a faster cardiac rate. Now, how does this work? Well, these epinephrine and norepinephrine will bind to beta-1 adrenergic receptors in the heart, and this stimulates the production of cyclic AMP in the pacemaker cells, and the cyclic AMP keeps these HCN channels open. So this is the key point, is that it causes the production of cyclic AMP, and then this cyclic AMP keeps these channels open, so then more sodium can keep being influxed inside the cell. Now, to reduce the cardiac rate, acetylcholine is released by vagus nerve endings. Now, the vagus nerve is a parasympathetic nerve. So acetylcholine is released, and it binds to muscarinic acetylcholine receptors, and this causes separate potassium channels, muscarinic potassium channels, to open in the pacemaker cells, and this leads to an outward diffusion of potassium. And what this does is it partially counters the inward diffusion of the sodium through the HCN channels. So when this happens, there's sodium going inside, but once these potassium channels open up, the potassium from inside the cell goes outside, and the effect of this is that it slowers the rate of this diastolic depolarization. In a way, it slightly hyperpolarizes it, so it's a much slower rate of diastolic depolarization. And what this does is it means there's a slower rate of the action potential production, therefore a reduced cardiac rate. Now, just to quickly finish off the video, during exercise the cardiac rate will increase due to decreased vagus nerve inhibition of the sinoatrial node. Okay, because remember, vagus nerve is a parasympathetic nerve, so if we have less of this, so if we have inhibition of the vagus nerve, then this will lead to an increase in the cardiac rate. And the cardiac rate will also increase due to increased sympathetic nerve stimulation. So finally, autonomic innervation of the heart is coordinated by the cardiac control center in the medulla oblongata of the brainstem, and the cardiac control center in the medulla oblongata is coordinated by higher brain areas and by sensory feedback from baroreceptors. And just a final definition, we have two effects which can define whether the cardiac rate will increase or decrease. We have a positive chronotropic effect, which increases the cardiac rate, and we have a negative chronotropic effect, which decreases the cardiac rate.